Excellencies, our distinguished speaker, Ambassador Tommy Koh, Rashos, Professor Vincent Yip, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning and welcome to the RIGSS Friday Forum lecture by Ambassador Tommy Koh on Nation Building, Lessons from Singapore's Success. This is the fourth and final lecture of the 9th RIGSS Anniversary Lecture Series that began on 10th of October. Under the benevolent and far-sighted leadership of His Majesty the King, RIGSS was established 9 years ago in October 2013 as a leadership institute and a think tank. Inspired by His Majesty's vision, leadership, and service to our country and people, the institute has offered numerous programs over the past 9 years with the key objective of promoting excellence in leadership and governance. And we continue to do so with renewed vigor and zeal as our country undertakes major transformative initiatives focused on progress, prosperity, and people towards achieving our new vision of a developed nation as promulgated by His Majesty the King. As we commemorate our 9th anniversary, we are happy to have been able to bring to you the 9th RIGSS Anniversary Lecture Series, which concludes today. The series of lectures this week are inspired by a book Ambassador Tommy Koh edited called The 50 Secrets of Singapore's Success. Therefore, the overall theme of the lecture is Nation Building, Lessons from Singapore's Success. And the 3 lectures before today by different speakers cover 3 key aspects of Singapore's success as a nation, namely security, economy, and anti-corruption. In the final lecture today, we look forward to hearing from Ambassador Koh, the larger game plan and the big picture story that made Singapore, Singapore. Ambassador has told us that he would talk for only about 15 minutes and devote the rest of the 90 minutes for Q&A session. So please take the opportunity to raise any questions you may have for Ambassador pertaining to the subject of today's talk. We are truly grateful to Ambassador Tommy Koh for not only agreeing to be a speaker for our Friday Forum today, but also for recommending and introducing us to highly resourceful speakers we have had in this lecture series. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have no doubt you will find Ambassador Koh's talk this morning timely, relevant, and enriching. And to make it even more purposeful, we are honored to have Amakarma Hamudoji, the chairperson of the Royal Civil Service Commission, to moderate this session. So without further ado, let me hand over to our moderator to introduce our speaker and begin the session. Chair, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Tashsong. A very good morning and Kuzizampo to Your Excellency, Tashos, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us in today's Friday Forum on the theme Nation Building, Lessons from Singapore with His Excellency Ambassador Tommy Koh. The theme of nation building, as Tashsong also pointed out, is so relevant for us in Bhutan today as we continue our work on transforming the civil service with the objective of achieving the 3 Ps of prosperity, people, and progress. And here the lessons from Singapore will be most useful and appropriate for us in Bhutan. As also indicated earlier, His Excellency will speak for 15 minutes, and this is to provide more time for questions and to allow this session to be interactive. We request you to raise your hands electronically or send in your questions via Slido with the event code that is shown on the screen. And also we request you to give a thumbs up to questions that have already been raised that you would also like to ask. I would now like to take the opportunity to introduce His Excellency Ambassador and Professor Tommy Koh. Professor Tommy Koh is a highly accomplished diplomat, academic, and renowned environmentalist. He is currently the Emeritus Professor of Law at the National University of Singapore, Ambassador at Large at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Chairman of the International Advisory Panel of the Center for International Law at the NUS. In the course of his career, Professor has served in many important positions, both as a diplomat, academic, and many international fora. He was the Dean of Faculty of Law at NUS, Singapore's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York, Ambassador to the United States of America, High Commissioner to Canada, Ambassador to Mexico. He was the president of the Third UN Conference on the Law of the Sea. He was also the chairman of the preparatory committee for and the main committee for the UN Conference on Environment and Development, the Earth Summit. He was the UN Secretary General's special envoy to Russia, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. He was the founding chairman of the National Arts Council, founding executive director of the Asia-Europe Foundation, and former chairman of the National Heritage Board. He was Singapore's chief negotiator in negotiating an agreement to establish diplomatic relations between Singapore and China. He was also Singapore's chief negotiator for the US-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. He acted as Singapore's agent in 2 legal disputes with Malaysia. He has chaired 2 dispute panels for the WTO. He is the co-chairman of the China-Singapore Forum and the Japan-Singapore Symposium. He was once called by the Reader's Digest in an article as Singapore's star in Washington when he was only in his early 40s. Professor Koh has received awards from the government of Singapore, Chile, Finland, France, Japan, Netherlands, Spain, and the United States. Professor Koh received the Champion of the Earth Award from UNEP and the inaugural President's Award for the Environment from Singapore. He was conferred with honorary doctoral degrees in law by Yale and Monash Universities. Harvard University also conferred on him the Great Negotiator Award in 2014. We in RIGSS and in Bhutan are highly honored indeed to host this Friday forum with Professor Tommy Koh. Professor, we once again welcome you and we look forward to your discourse and learning from your vast experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It is a great pleasure to have this conversation with you in Bhutan. And I wish I were with you physically. I recall with great pleasure my visit to Bhutan in the year 2000. I had gone to Bhutan as the special envoy of my then Prime Minister, Mr. Goh Chok Tong. And my mandate was to see His Majesty the King and ask for his support for Singapore's candidature to be a non-permanent member of the Security Council. I had a very successful and happy trip to Bhutan, and His Majesty received me with great kindness. I have a photo which I sent to Chiwang of a meeting with the King at the palace. I want to tell you about how this book, 50 Secrets of Singapore Success, came to be edited. The Mexican embassy in Singapore told me that there were 27 Mexican students in town on a study visit. And they asked whether I could meet them for an hour before they returned to Mexico. And I, of course, said yes, happy to meet them. We had a wide-ranging conversation about our challenges, our successes. At the end of the hour, one student asked me, said, "Prof, what is the secret of Singapore's success?" I said, "It's not one secret, but many secrets." And she said, "Please write a book about it." I didn't think it was possible to write a book, so I decided to do the next best thing, which is to edit a book. The challenge was to sit down and ask myself, what are the 50 most important success stories? So I had a list, which I reduced to 50, and then I had to find 50 friends who were willing to write an essay each for me, and I gave them 3 months to do it. So I got the book done in 6 months, and the book has been very successful. What I want to do this morning is to talk about what I consider the 10 most important success stories. Number one is the economic story. How we went from per capita $500 to over $58,000 today. You know, it's more than 100 times our per capita income when we became independent. So this is a quite remarkable success story. And I asked Professor Tan Ki Yap to try to explain how did we do it. But I would say that it is not just high economic growth and high per capita income, but it is also full employment. In many countries, there's unemployment, especially among the young people. So I'm happy to tell you that in Singapore, we have full employment. In fact, there's a huge shortage of workers. And in Singapore, there are 3.5 million Singapore citizens, and there are about 2 million foreigners living and working here. 1.5 million on short-term passes, and another 500,000 who will become permanent resident. So that is the most important success story. I would say the second success story is good school. Education is so important in the life career of an individual, but also as a nation. So having good schools is a very important success story. And over time, we have good primary school, good secondary school. At a tertiary level, we have 3 streams. For those who are technically inclined, they go to the Institute of Technical Education or a polytechnic, and those who want a more academic career, then we have, I think by now, maybe 5 universities. So I would say having a good education system is very important. The next success story is housing. I think this is not so relevant to Bhutan because you have plenty of land. Probably housing is not a problem. But in a city like Singapore, which is very crowded, and we inherited from the British a huge housing deficit, overcoming that housing deficit and building affordable housing for the people is very important. And we are quite unusual in that 80% of our people live in housing which they own, but which was built for them by the government. So housing, solving the housing problem, I would say, is the third most important success story. The fourth most important success story is to make available universal and affordable healthcare. The government again play a big role in this. In every part of Singapore, you have a polyclinic, which is run by the government, which gives the people affordable healthcare at a highly subsidized cost. Then you have acute hospital, community hospital, various other health institutions. But the bottom line is, you want a healthy people, and in order to have healthy people, you must have a good and affordable healthcare system. I would say that the next success story is to have a safe and livable city. My good friend Koh Boon Hui spoke about the role of the police in maintaining safety in Singapore. But I would say the people working on the environment are equally important because you want the city to be both safe and livable so that people can breathe the air, can drink the water, swim in the unpolluted sea and so on. So giving the people a high quality of environment is important. The next important success story is to build a good public transport system. This is again not so important in Bhutan, but in a congested city like Singapore. And in order to prevent Singapore from being choked to death by traffic, as happened in many cities in Asia. So in order to discourage people from owning a car, you have to build a very good and affordable public transport system. The next important success story is low corruption. Then the ninth success story, I would say, is the strong rule of law. Strong rule of law in Singapore and making the rule of law in the world an important advocacy of Singapore diplomacy. So we speak up for the rule of law in the world, and we speak against countries like Russia that violate the rule of law. The last and 10th lesson is effective diplomacy. Because of our effective diplomacy, we have been able to work closely with our 9 regional partners and build a successful regional organization called ASEAN. And ASEAN has succeeded in maintaining the peace in Southeast Asia. We have integrated our 10 economy into a single economy. We are friendly to all the major powers. And every year when we meet, we invite the major countries of the world to join us. And they come because ASEAN is a successful and a credible regional organization. So I would say those are the 10 of the 50 most important success stories. How would I describe the Singapore model? I would describe the Singapore model as capitalism with socialist characteristics. Public housing, good schools, affordable healthcare, public transport, these are all benefits provided by the state. So unlike America or the European country, the government plays a very strong interventionist role in Singapore. So I would say we are a free market, we are very vibrant private sector, but the Singapore model is capitalism with socialist characteristics. I don't want you to think that we have no problems, because we do have problems. And I want to leave you with what I consider our 4 most important challenges. The first challenge is growing inequality. This is not unique to Singapore. It's true almost everywhere in the world, that as you become prosperous, you become increasingly divided between rich and poor. And in Singapore, we've not been able to solve the challenge of inequality. So inequality, first challenge. The second challenge is a contradiction between being a country and being a global city. We are one of the world's global cities, very open to the world, welcoming of foreigners to live and work here. But there's a contradiction between being a global city and being a country. The third challenge is the balance between local and foreign. As I said, there are 3.5 million of us, and there are 2 million foreigners living and working in Singapore. And we are very open to foreign talent. Foreigners are welcome to not only work in Singapore, but to hold very senior positions. And this creates sometimes a certain friction between the aspirations of the local and being open to global talent. I would say the last challenge is a challenge in our foreign policy, external policy. We live in a part of the world which has become a very important theater of contest for influence between the United States and China. In Singapore, you experience the intense rivalry between US and China, but also the rivalry between China and Japan, China and India. And the challenge to Singapore diplomat is, how do we maintain neutrality? How can we be on very good terms with all the major powers, but at the same time, not take sides in their disputes. And this is increasingly difficult because we are under pressure by the major power to take their side against the other, which we try to refrain from doing. But as the rivalry becomes more intense, the pressure on us gets greater, and it is increasingly difficult to remain neutral, but on very friendly terms with all these major powers. So I'll stop here and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Professor. We see the Honorable Foreign Minister with his hands raised. Mijay, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It was very interesting, and I look forward to reading the book. In the interest of time, I will go straight to the question. I found I'm sure you said there are 50 secrets of Singapore's success, and you outlined 10 of them. In your 10 list, you did not mention about the private sector's role, but you mentioned it as a model that capitalist with socialist characteristics. And my question is, what role, was it a government-led role, or what was the role of the private sector in the economic development of Singapore? That is my first question. And the second question is I'm not sure whether you will have some experience, but Bhutan and Singapore is very different because of a geographical location. We are landlocked, whereas Singapore has the access to the sea, which I find is a very big advantage. So are there any advices that you could give regarding for a small landlocked country, what are the opportunities that we could, what are the opportunities that we can take, given that we have two large neighbors? So these two questions in short, Ambassador. For the interest of time, I will keep it short. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So your first question is about our economic model. So I have to take you back in history a little bit. We were ruled, as you know, for close to 150 years by the British. Under the British, Singapore became a major port of the world. And being a major port also attract a vibrant service industry. Shipping, insurance, warehousing, bunkering, and so on, and of trade, international trade. But these sectors alone, the port and trade, did not create enough jobs. So when we became independent, there was a large number of unemployed people. And the government had to decide, how do we create jobs? How do we create a more diversified economy? And they decided trade and shipping are not enough. We must create a manufacturing sector. And because in the beginning, wages were very low in Singapore, we attracted multinational corporations to come to Singapore, open factories, use our relatively cheap labor to manufacture for the world. So we depended first on the world's multinational corporations. Then we realized that we should also create our own local companies, and that we should not rely on the foreign companies alone. And over time, the private sector in Singapore has become more vibrant and has played a more important role in Singapore. So if you ask me today, I would say that the state sector has shrunk. The private sector has expanded. But the state still plays a very important role in the economy, which is probably a legacy of the past, So the state trying to privatize most things. They privatized Singapore Airlines, shipping line. But the state still has a share in many companies in Singapore. So, I think the government recognizes that the private sector is the engine of growth, and we must encourage the growth of the private sector. They are the people who have the capital, the entrepreneurial spirit to start businesses, and we encourage them. So Singapore has now become one of the favorite startup capitals of the world. We encourage young people from all over the world to come to Singapore and start their businesses. And there's a lot of venture capital available. The government also make available loans on very favorable terms to help these young people start their businesses. And many of these small businesses have now become unicorns, They're valued at over $1 billion. So this is very good for Singapore because this is the future. We want young people to be in the private sector, start businesses, especially in new technology, and I consider them the future of Singapore. Your second question, can you remind me what's the second question?
Any advice for the landlocked country that is landlocked? So what are the opportunities that we can harness?
When I was in Bhutan 22 years ago, both His Majesty and I met all the ministers, and in fact, they hosted me to dinner. They asked me for some suggestions on what Bhutan could do. This is 22 years ago, no? And I said to them that you should look for inspiration to Europe. Europe has some small but very successful landlocked countries. And I single out in particular 2 small but very successful European countries as model, Switzerland and Luxembourg. The experience of Switzerland, Luxembourg shows that being landlocked need not be a handicap that you can't overcome. You'll be pleased to know that today Luxembourg ranks as the richest country in the world by per capita income. And Switzerland ranked number 2. And Switzerland and Singapore are always competing for the top spot in the index of competitive economies, So draw inspiration from the European landlocked country. And I would say one lesson you should learn from Switzerland is that you need to be on very good terms with all your neighbors so that you have access to the market, access through the territory to seaports. And being small doesn't mean that you have to be isolated or poor. If you read my new book, Small States in a Big World, Size is Not Destiny, the book is full of essays by very successful small countries, not just in Europe, but all over the world. So that's my answer to your second question.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. In fact, I just finished reading your second book, The Small States. Thank you. Thank you.
Plus, we have Professor Yip's hands raised. Professor?
Yes. Professor Koh, you of course know that when I served in the government, my main job was to promote the science park and research and development.
Yeah.
So now the venture capital and startup culture has risen quite a lot. But this past 14 days is Nobel Prize days.
Yes.
And of course, we didn't come close again at all. In 1987, I actually wrote a big article in Leha Zaobao saying, will Singapore ever get a Nobel Prize? At that time, I stuck my foot in my mouth. I said, I predict within 20 years, when we will not. And China may get one. And China got one, Hong Kong got one, Singapore is still 0. So could you address this when we are technologically quite advanced, economically very advanced? Why are our students, our researchers not up to that level? By the way, I want to remind the population thing. Denmark had 2 Nobel Prize winners this time, 2 of them, this past one. And their population is identical to that of Singapore.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I don't think winning a Nobel Prize is so important.
Oh, okay, fine. Yeah.
Not so
But-
important. Not so. Winning a prize is like winning a lottery. And if you look at the recent Nobel Prize in economics and look at the number of nominations, there were over 100 nominees. And why the selection committee picked these 3 out of over 100 is sometimes arbitrary. Sometimes a matter of luck. So I often tell my wife that winning a Nobel Prize is not so important. What's more important is to have a world-class education system. What's more important is to have a competitive economy. What's more important is to afford your citizens a very high quality of life. That's more important. And by the way, one of the small countries I admire is a small country in the Caribbean called St. Lucia. St. Lucia is a population of even smaller than Bhutan, but it has won 2 Nobel Prizes, one in economics and one in literature. So winning a Nobel Prize sometimes just a lottery, matter of luck. What I'm more proud of in Singapore is that my university, National University of Singapore, has recently been ranked number 19 in the world. And the NUS Law School, to which I've given much of my life, has been ranked as one of the top 10 law schools in the world. I think that's more important. Winning the Nobel Prize is not important.
Okay, maybe later you can talk about sports. I know you made some public statement about World Cup and about Olympic Games too. Yeah, maybe it's not today's topic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I have an essay.
Thank you.
I have an essay in this book, Small States, on this question: can small country win medals at the Summer Olympic Game and Winter Olympic Game? What provoked me to write the essay is that when the Singapore team came back from the Tokyo Summer Olympic Game empty-handed, they didn't win anything. So some of my Singapore friends asked me, do you think small country can win medals at the Olympic Games? And I decided, why don't I do some research? And you'll be surprised to learn that 1/3 of the medals in Tokyo were earned by athletes from small countries, some of which are even smaller than Bhutan, And the unbelievable thing is that at the Beijing Winter Olympic Games, the country that won the most medals is not the United States, not China, not Russia, but a small country called Norway.
Yeah.
So even in competitive sport, small country can do well. Yeah, being small, it's a handicap. Being small is a handicap, but it is a handicap that you sometimes can overcome through greater effort and by other means.
Thank you, Professor. There are currently some questions on Slido, which I would like to request if Professor could address. One of the most frequently asked is, currently Bhutanese spend more than 30 to 40% of their salary on rent. How should Bhutan go about making housing affordable? How did Singapore solve this issue?
Maybe here Singapore's experience has some relevance for Bhutan. And this is one of the socialist characteristics of Singapore's capitalist system. See, the governing party, PAP, started from the left. It has socialist roots. And they believe that the government should provide universal, affordable housing and establish a statutory board called HDB, Housing and Development Board. In the beginning, they built very basic housing for the poor people. But over time, you'll be surprised to learn, and this is in a free market economy, 80% of the people in Singapore live in housing which they own, but was built for them by the government. And maybe the Bhutanese government should consider setting up your own HDB, and to build and sell affordable housing for the people.
Thank you, Professor. I think these points that you have been raising are most pertinent for us as we actually are currently looking at developing the key performance indicators going forward, looking at 2030, looking at 2035, and even up to 2040 and further on. So I found that the points that you raised are very, very similar to the things that we are currently grappling with. So thank you very much for that. There is a second question that has been asked, which is, what are the causes of inequality in Singapore? And what are the interventions placed by the government to fill in this gap?
Inequality is inherent. It is inherent in the capitalist system. Because the capitalist system awards capital more than it awards labor. A capitalist system awards people who are talented, highly educated, the achievers, you know. The capitalist system tend to pay too much salary to what I call the brain worker, the white collar worker, brain worker. And it tends to underpay people who work with their hands and people who work with their hearts. People who work with their hearts are people like teachers, nurses, social workers. This is the nature of the capitalist system. And in order to overcome these inherent defects of a capitalist system, a good government, take Switzerland as an example. No? Switzerland is a capitalist country, but the Gini coefficient in Switzerland is very low. It's about half that of Singapore. You know? Singapore Gini coefficient over 0.4, but in the case of Switzerland, it's below 0.3. How does that happen? Switzerland doesn't have a minimum wage, but it pays the hand workers and the hard workers much better than in Singapore. Secondly, it taxes the rich more heavily than Singapore and transfer some of the taxes from the rich to the poor. So, you know, there's this transfer. And I think Switzerland probably has a more generous welfare system than Singapore. We have no unemployment benefits because we have full employment. And we don't pay pension to old people. So many of old people live in poverty, you know, because those who are retired and don't have enough savings in their CPF account, they live in poverty. And you'll be shocked to know in Singapore, famous for our food, when people are crazy about food, there are old people who go hungry every day, you know? So we needed charities to cook and bring hot food, hot meals every day to these poor people, you know? So I would say on equality, don't learn from Singapore. Learn from Switzerland.
Yes. We have Ambassador Tommy Koh. His hands are raised.
Yes, thank you, Dasho. Thank you, Ambassador, for all your very interesting insights. Ambassador, I know that you are well known for your, in the diplomatic field, you're well known for being the chair of the Conference on the Law of the Sea.
Yeah.
So from your experience as chair of this conference, what were some of the strategies you used as the representative of a small state to ensure its success? And, I have three questions, Ambassador. I have three questions. There's the first one. The second one, I think you mentioned about Singapore's relations with China, and you mentioned that as being one of Singapore's challenges. So I was interested to know about Singapore's strategies in dealing with China, including the rivalry between, China and the other great powers. How does Singapore deal with this? As Honorable Foreign Minister also mentioned, we are landlocked, and we are landlocked between these two Asian giants. So I guess some of Singapore's strategies may be useful for us as a small state as well. And the last question is more of given your long diplomatic experience, would you have any advice to me as an ambassador of a small country in a large country like Australia? Thank you, Ambassador.
Okay, thank you for your 3 questions. On your first question, the UN entrusted to me the chairmanship of 2 major conferences, the Law of the Sea, and then 10 years later, the Earth Summit. It is very challenging to chair a major international conference because you try to keep everybody in a plenary informed, but at the same time, you have to choreograph negotiation to try to resolve all the outstanding problems. So I have an essay. I have an essay which I'll send you on how to chair international conferences successfully. I try in that essay to distill some of the lessons I've learned myself, you know. And I can also send you an essay on the Earth Summit negotiating process, which I also discuss at some length. So that's the first question. Your second question really about our relation to the major powers. I mean, every country must choose a foreign policy that suits its strategic needs and calculations. In the case of Singapore, we decided that we want to be on very good terms with all the major powers of the world. So we have very good and substantive relation with the United States. This relationship is anchored on a number of things, one of which is the US-Singapore Free Trade Agreement, which I helped to negotiate. I was the chief negotiator. This is a very important anchor of the relationship between United States and Singapore. Another anchor of our relationship is the MOU signed by Lee Kuan Yew and Vice President Dan Quayle at a time when the Americans were expelled from the air base in the Philippines, Clark, and the naval base, Subic. We didn't want the Americans to leave the region because we consider them as helping to maintain peace and security in the region. So we signed an MOU with the American, give them access, not a base, because we're too small to have a US base. Instead, we give the US Air Force access to our air base. We give the US Navy access to our naval base. So this access agreement is also a very important pillar in our relation to America. And we try generally to be helpful to them. So when President Biden announced a new economic initiative called the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, although it's not as good as TPP, but we immediately supported them and we're helping them to make this successful. Our relationship with China is more complicated. During the Mao era, our relationship with China were not good because China under Mao was subverting our security, supporting the communist movement, the communist guerrillas in Thailand and Malaysia. When Mao died and Deng Xiaoping took over, Deng Xiaoping completely changed the nature of China's relationship with Southeast Asia. And he began a new chapter of good relation between China and Southeast Asia. Singapore was one of the first countries to support Deng Xiaoping's policy of openness and reform. We not only supported them by word, but by deeds. Our legendary finance minister, Dr. Goh Keng Swee, became an advisor to China's special economic zone. Over time, Singapore has trained more than 100,000 Chinese officials in Singapore on various things, including city management, high technology, port, airport, whatever they want. We customize courses for them. And we have become China's largest investor. And China is the only country with which we have 3 government-led major projects, beginning in Suzhou, where there's a very big industrial park. Then in Tianjin, where we helped China to build an eco-city. And now a very big project based in Chongqing on connectivity. And there's a bilateral joint council co-chaired by a Chinese vice premier and a Singapore deputy prime minister. So our relations to China are very close, very substantive, you know. But still, from time to time, we have problems with them. They don't like the fact that we are close America. They don't like the fact that we still send our soldiers to train in Taiwan, which for them is anathema, no? But when I negotiated with China in 1990 to establish our formal diplomatic relations with them, one of the conditions of our recognizing them was that we can continue to send our soldiers to train in Taiwan. And they conceded to me. And I'm holding them to the agreement we signed in 1990. But we are also very close to Japan and to India. We have free trade agreements with both Japan and India. With India, we recently instituted something new, ministerial roundtable consisting of 3 ministers on each side. And I don't know whether you know, after Mauritius, Singapore is the 2nd largest investor in India. We are not a big investor in Japan, but we are very close to Japan. And Singapore even took the initiative to tell the Japanese that you should be more active in projecting your soft power. And we helped them to build in Singapore something called Japan Creative Center, you know. So bottom line is, we have very good relations with all the major powers. Our agenda is to be relevant and useful to each of them, but not to take sides in their quarrels. I can't remember what the 3rd question is.
Ambassador, the 3rd question was, given your long diplomatic experience, would you have any advice to me as an ambassador of a small country,
in
a
Australia,
large country like Australia?
We also are very close to the Australians. We are a major investor in Australia. We have very close defense cooperation in Australia. In fact, our training ground in Brisbane, in Queensland, we have a bilateral agreement under which Australia allow us to send our soldiers to train in Australia. The training ground that we have access to is bigger than the whole of Singapore, you know. So we're very close to Australia. My general advice to you is, you may represent a small country, but you must maintain your dignity, and you must never allow a bigger country to bully you. This is advice I tell all my younger diplomats. Because you're from a small country, there's a natural tendency for a bigger country to bully you, you know, or to disrespect you. You must stand firm. Defend the dignity of Bhutan, defend Bhutan's national interest, and never allow yourself to be bullied. And you can overcome this asymmetrical relationship by behavior on your part, which signal to the other side that you may be a big country, I'm a small country, but this is a negotiation between 2 equals. So when I was negotiating the free trade agreement in America, at our first meeting in Washington, DC, which was open to the media, I said to the Americans, we want a free trade agreement with the Americans, but the agreement must be fair and balanced. And if you make unreasonable demand to Singapore, we will walk away from this negotiation. We're willing to let it fail, you know. We are not desperate. We don't want an agreement at any price. And if you behave unreasonably and demand that because I'm a big country, you're a small country, you must give in to me on all my demands, I tell the American, buzz off, you know. Yeah, I'm not desperate to have an agreement. When I was negotiating with China in 1990, I said the same thing to them. Sure, we want formal diplomatic relations with China, but not at any cost. First, we will not subscribe to any language which is insulting to Taiwan. And second, I've got two demands, which if you don't accept, we will break off the negotiation. In the end, they give in to me on both demands. So my advice to you as Ambassador of Bhutan in a bigger country is that maintain your dignity, defend your national interests, don't allow bigger country to bully you.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you.
Ambassador, you talked a lot earlier about the 10 critical areas, and one was education. So there are some questions that have been raised on education, which is also very, for me, also something that I would like to know. The question is, how did Singapore improve her quality of education? Is free education the way forward for making education system translate to producer of skilled personnel? And would you say that English is important and will remain so for the next century?
Okay, first on language. English will remain the most important international language, but it's important to encourage your young people to learn many languages. So in Singapore, it's compulsory that in addition to English, you must learn your mother tongue, you know. So your mother tongue can be Chinese, it can be Malay, it can be an Indian language called Tamil. In addition, our schools allow students to learn to speak other languages, and the languages offered include Japanese. They can learn Japanese, they can learn French, they can learn German. And when they learn these languages, very often they are given scholarships to study in those countries at the tertiary level, you know. And it's good for us to have these connections. It's good for us to have in Singapore people who studied in China, studied in Japan, studied in America, studied in Germany, studied in France, because these are valuable connections that we make. Your question of how to build successful school, right? I think first you must have the culture. I don't know about the culture in Bhutan, but in Singapore, as in many parts of East Asia, Southeast Asia, the culture is respect for education. And all parents, rich and poor, they want their children to do well in school. They know that doing well in school is a passport to success. So the culture in Singapore is conducive to learning. And we make sure that all schools in Singapore are good schools. There are some elite schools, but we make sure that all our neighborhood schools are good schools. So even if you don't get into an elite school, you are assured of a quality education. And how do we do that? I think we do that by paying our teachers very well. This is really the secret of our success in education. Pay your teachers well. Most countries don't pay their teachers well. You look at America, you know, they pay the teachers so poorly, they don't get high quality people joining the education system or staying there for life. And the schools are not conducive to learning. Many students not interested in learning. In Singapore, the kids are very serious and want to learn. And we have good teachers. We have a world-class teacher training college called IT, National Institute of Education, NIE. It's in my book. So good teacher training, paying teachers well, attracting good people into the education service and staying in education.
Thank you, Professor. I'll take one more question from the Slido. The question is, how did Singapore achieve strong growth in science and technological institutes? And what were the roles of these institutes in the economic development of Singapore?
I think one of our important breakthroughs was to depart from the British system. See, we inherited from the British an education system that's skewed to academic learning. Because unfortunately in Britain, there's a class divide, you know, and the upper class look down on the laboring class. In fact, I went to Cambridge University and no one at Cambridge want to be in the manufacturing industry or in some other manufacturing. They all want to be white-collar workers. So we decided that the education system we inherited from the British was no good. We have to change the system. And so what do? We allow students with different kinds of intelligence and gifts to do well in institutions that are conducive to their learning. So for students who are not eligible to go to university, they have two other options. They can go to a polytechnic. We have wonderful polytechnic, high quality teachers, excellent infrastructure. And the bottom line is graduates of our polytechnic get good jobs, good paying jobs, and they are much sought after by the private sector, you know? So over time, the prejudice against blue-collar workers gradually has become eroded because people who went to the polytechnic have done well in life. But there are students who don't even qualify for the polytechnic. And instead of treating them as discards, you know, people who have no hope in life, we said, no, we must find a pathway for them. So we revamped the Vocational Institute into world-class Institute of Technical Education. If you visit Singapore and visit one of our Institute of Technical Education, you'll be shocked at the quality of the infrastructure, the campus, the good teachers they have. So the secret is whether you go to an Institute of Technical Education or go to a polytechnic or go to university, you are learning in a really conducive environment with high morale, believing that when you graduate, you will get a good job. You know? So, and now we're going to take this one step further, which is very difficult to do. Now we're trying to learn from Germany and Switzerland and say doing well at university is not good enough. You must be ready for work. And we have introduced something from Germany and Switzerland, which is work and study program, that you work part-time while you're studying so that when you graduate, you're ready for industry, which is one of the strengths of the German and Swiss education system. It's very different from the British, you know, but we are very pragmatic people, although our historical tie was to Britain, but we've gone away from the British model to our own model. And now we are trying to learn from Switzerland and Germany and include their model into our education system.
Thank you, Professor. Dashasunampi.
Thank you, Anulche. Thank you, Professor Koh, for the excellent presentation on the secrets of Singapore. I wanted to ask you two questions. You talked about it's on the economic development. One question is about industrial policy, and the other on migrant labor. On the industrial policy, I would like to seek your views for countries like Bhutan, who are in early stages of development, whereas often we rush towards kind of import substitution industries when we have already reached IT and space industrial kind of a scenario. So what is your advice? So here we often believe that it is more important to substitute rather than get into export-led kind of industry. That's the first one. There's always a temptation, especially with the different, democratic, we're a democracy, so therefore different actors who come in. The second question is about, in terms of even Singapore, the use of outside labor, migrant labor. How important was it? And for a country like Bhutan, where our population is less than 1 million, less than 800,000, that in terms of this, the critical mass requirement for your development, labor you don't. So what kind of a policy would you recommend? Thank you, Professor Koh.
Okay, so on your first question, when we started our industrialization in the early phase, the policy was import substitution. Have infant industry, protect them from competition. But we soon realized this was the dead end, Our market is so small. We want company not just to cater to a protected Singapore market. We want them to export to the world. They wanted to compete with the world. So we remove all the tariff barriers and basically have a tariff-free open economy. And in the beginning, because the private sector didn't have the experience, the government had to take the lead, starting all kinds of industry, even hotels, When we first opened up, we didn't have 5-star hotels in Singapore. So even the government built a 5-star hotel, and then it divested when there was no longer a need for government to get involved, So the government played a hand in starting our iron industry, steel industry, National Steel Industry. Later on, we divested, and now it's owned by Tata. So in the beginning of our industrialized process, the state had to play a big hand. But gradually, as the private sector grew, the state withdrew and divested. So my advice to you is import substitution is a dead-end road. Don't go down this road.
Thank you. Second was on the use of migrant labor.
Well, I think your need for migrant labor would not be as big as our need, because we have a very big industrial sector. We are the world's, I think, 3rd largest financial center. And we don't have enough workers for our factory. We don't have enough top talent to run our financial center. So we have no choice but to import workers for our factories, to build our homes, to build our ships, repair our ships. And to be the world number 3 financial center means that you really need top financial talent from the world, So we have many really high-powered, very capable people in our financial industry. But as I say, it creates a problem because there's this need to balance local and foreign, And if you bring in too many foreigners into your banking industry, the local people feel that they've been discriminated against. Why are you not supporting local talent, But Bhutan needs are different from Singapore needs, because you don't have a big industrial sector, so you don't need to bring in very large number of workers for your factories, your shipyards, which we do. So your need for foreign workers is probably modest compared to Singapore. And in Singapore, the 1.5 million foreign workers who live here are on contract. So when the contract expires, they are not allowed to live in Singapore. They have to go back to their country. And only 500,000 foreigners who are working in Singapore are granted permanent resident status. So the majority of the foreign workers, the 1.5 million, are on contract and have to go back to the country when the contract expires.
Professor, thank you. There is a question which is quite a, sort of a burning question for us in Bhutan. It says people generally have a tendency of moving to greener pastures. Did Singapore ever face brain drain issue? And if so, how did it overcome the issue?
It's impossible to overcome the issue. I mean, in the early days of nation building, we all felt we have a duty to go home. We must take part in this great nation building project. And although we were all given, I was offered a job by the UN, I declined, you know. The Americans offered me teaching positions in Boston, in Hawaii, I declined because I felt I have a duty to my country to go back and help. But now that Singapore has done well, the young people don't feel this, you know. So if they're highly educated, they're talent spotted. And many young Singaporeans are working in London, New York, in Australia, in many advanced countries. And you can't stop it, you know. The happy news is, for every Singaporean we lose, we get more than 2 foreigners who want to live and work in Singapore. And many of them want to settle here because they like the opportunities and lifestyle in Singapore, you know. And don't make the mistake of treating those who've gone abroad to work as traitors. You know, for a long time, Singapore government made the mistake of treating them as traitors. But this was a mistake, you know. Around about, maybe in the 1980s, we changed our policy. We realized that actually they are a resource of Singapore. And we keep in touch with Singapore communities in all the advanced countries. We encourage them to come home to visit Singapore. We encourage them to establish links between their industry and the Singapore industry, between their company and Singapore companies. And we treat them as an asset, as a resource, rather than as traitors.
Thank you, Professor. This is the current debate that is going on in Bhutan. And we are also, faced with this issue of quite large numbers of very productive young, officers and youth, looking to work and study abroad.
Yeah.
And the way we look at it, at least in services, we hope that we can encourage them to come back and work for us whenever they feel that they would like to contribute to the country. Perhaps before we go to the next question, since we have...
But you should balance this by having a proactive policy of attracting talented people in the world to come and work in Bhutan, as we do, you know. So be open to foreign talent. Of course, you manage your numbers. So to compensate for the loss of talent, bring in foreign talent. And Bhutan is a very attractive place to live in. There will be many young people in the world, especially in the creative industries, who would love to be in Bhutan, you know. Welcome them. Make them part of your family.
Thank you. Since we have our Honorable Prime Minister, perhaps I would like to request if the Honorable Prime Minister would like to ask a few questions.
Thank you, Tashkama, and thank you, Professor Koh, for your insightful informations. I was silently enjoying, and I was about to raise my hand for a question. So, Tashkama rightly read my mind. Thank you very much. Professor Koh, I know successes of Singapore is being talked about by everyone in the world, like we do in Bhutan, and we look forward to emulating some of your successes and bring those standards to Bhutan also. My question or comment, or for that matter, doubt would be little on the other end, actually. I was thinking, as you're talking about very eloquently on the 10 factors that brought Singapore where you are now. You also mentioned about some 3-4 challenges that you are facing now.
Right.
Of that, I was trying to relate to two challenges that you just mentioned. That is widening income gap and balancing the foreign versus local expertise or workers. So on that note, my doubt was, I don't think Singapore has any poverty line. I don't think Singapore has any minimum daily wages. So how do you really measure people below a certain level of income? What is that minimum income below which you label them as poor? On the other side, since as Professor rightly mentioned, your balance economy between socialistic characteristics and on the capitalistic side, I was thinking what would be the ratio of native Singaporeans, if there are any, who belong to the lower half of income bracket, as well as native Singaporeans who are doing very well. I was just trying to go through, as you are talking, your peers rather, many native Singaporeans when Singapore took independence. I don't think all those Singaporeans would have the opportunity to go to Harvard or Cambridge like yourself to work with your brain. So many of them in the 60s and 70s who worked with their hands probably now might be on the streets. I was just thinking because all the good high-paying jobs are being taken by migrant immigrants. So on that note, how do you have any statistics as to differentiate the Singaporeans who are below and above that poverty line, if there's any? And my other question would be to ask you, because everyone asks you the secrets or factors of Singapore's success. My question would be to, if you have any one thing that Singapore should not have done, if you have any. Thank you, Professor Koh.
Should not have done.
Yes.
Okay. Your first question is about inequality. The Singapore government doesn't have a poverty line. And they never use the word poor or poverty to describe people at the bottom of our pyramid. They are called low-income family. Low income. If we take the international practice and draw the poverty line at half the, not per capita, but not half per capita, but what's the term? I forgot now. If you take the universal practice and draw a poverty line, then I would say about 30% of the Singapore population live below the poverty line. Because we have no poverty line, so we call them low income. So I've been advocating a minimum wage in Singapore, and the government rejected this because they are free market fundamentalists. They say let the free market determine wages, but there's a market failure because we have 1.5 million workers from other countries competing with our own workers, and this depressed wages at the lower end of our economy. So because of this market failure, you need to do something to raise wages at the bottom of our pyramid. So government has introduced something new called progressive wage model. Well, we've done two things, a progressive wage model and a supplement for low-income families, provided you're working. You have to be working, and then if your income is low, the government pays some money to you in cash and to your savings account, provident fund. I think the next Prime Minister, the fourth Prime Minister, Lawrence Wong, currently the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, I think he's much more concerned about this question of inequality and inclusivity. He often talks about his dream, his vision, that Singapore shouldn't be just to benefit the top people. The prosperity in Singapore should benefit everybody. So I think when he becomes Prime Minister, he's going to do a bit more to raise the wages of the people at the bottom. to what I call a living wage. So now that I can't have a minimum wage, I've been campaigning in Singapore to pay people a living wage, a wage enough for the worker and the family to live in dignity, you know. So that's my vision, and that's my campaign agenda. I'm happy to tell you on second point that people in the 60s, 70s who didn't have an opportunity to go to university, many of them have done very well in business. And some of the richest people in Singapore only have gone to high school. But they are very good business, they are multi-billionaires. And many of them are also very philanthropic, endow scholarships at our universities. And not all the rich people in Singapore are foreigners. In fact, if you look at the index, I think we have one of the world's highest concentration of millionaires in Singapore. There are many Singaporeans who've done well in life and are millionaires, especially in the professions in banking, in law, medicine, but also in the private sector. Yeah. So there's a balance of rich foreigners working in the financial center, in MNC, but also many rich local people. You know. I think that was the third question. Prime Minister, what was the third question?
I just wanted to know of the many success stories, if there are any that Singapore should not have done.
Oh, anything we shouldn't have done. We made many mistakes, you know. Maybe I should write a book about the many mistakes we made. One of which was the stop at two-child policy. In the beginning, we had too many children, you know, and the government was alarmed that we were producing so many children, we don't have enough jobs, and then the government says, stop at 2. But over time, as women are educated, they are emancipated, they have good jobs, they don't want to be baby factories, you know. So now we have one of the lowest birth rates in the world. I think it's around, our fertility rate is around 1, when you need 2.1 to replace the population. So that's one mistake we made.
Thank you, Professor.
Chair, you are muted.
Sorry, yes. The question is on interest rates, Professor.
Yeah.
How does the interest rates of financial institutes affect the economic and private sector development? And what can the government do to make it more effective? And this is also relevant, very relevant for Bhutan, because we have very high interest rates, almost 9 to 11%. And how should Bhutan plan to realize favorable interest rates?
I'm not sure how you manage your monetary system, but in the case of Singapore, MAS manages the monetary system. It's again very open to the world. No? We allow the Singapore dollar to float against a basket of currency. It's not pegged to the US dollar, but pegged to the currencies of our major trading partners. Interest rates here have never been allowed to go so high. For the last 10 years, it was very low interest rate because we're following the American. They're all printing money, you know, and the world was flooded with liquidity. But now, because of high inflation in America, the Fed is increasing interest rate. But interest rate in Singapore is still very low. I think it's between 2 and 3%. So we've never had high interest rate here, and we keep inflation low. We never allow inflation to rise too high, because that will affect interest rate. So I don't know how you manage your inflation, but inflation in Singapore usually below 2%, you know. So for this year, it's threatening to become close to 4%.
Okay. As we are coming quite close to the end, I thought I'd like to give an opportunity to RIGSS Director to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. In fact, I was wanting to give the opportunity to the audience, as I can see so many questions, especially on Slido. Nonetheless, I have also received many questions from different people to be asked to Ambassador. So let me ask one of them, which in a way also is of interest to me. So the question really is one factor that led to Singapore really liberalizing its economy and all the free trade arrangements that you have with the rest of the world. So in that context, for Bhutan, do you think joining multilateral organizations such as the WTO, in fact, particularly the WTO, do you think it will be helpful for Bhutan?
I can't tell you whether or not to join WTO, because it depends on what your aspirations are, no? Because if you want to be in the international trading system, we depend on trade for a living. No? Our external trade is 3 times the size of our GDP. So we survive by trade. So for us, WTO is absolutely critical, you know. So when Trump attacked WTO, we had to defend it and prevent him from doing more damage to WTO. But because our domestic market is so small, our policy is to expand our economic space. And the strategy is to negotiate free trade agreement with all the major economies in the world, so that we're plugged into the economy. We are connected to the economy through FTAs, you know. So we have FTAs with the United States, with China, with Japan, with India, with Australia, with New Zealand, with the EU, with the European Free Trade Area. We are very promiscuous in our trade policy. The only FTA which has caused us political problem is the FTA with India. So let me explain to you why our FTA with India is creating a political problem for Singapore. India has a surplus of talent and brain workers. And one of their objectives is to create opportunities for Indian professionals to work abroad. So in the FTA we have in India, there's a provision allowing Indian companies in India to transfer people from India to their branches in Singapore. And it's a good thing to have, you know, that we allow Indian companies the flexibility to move talented people from India to their branches in Singapore. But when this movement became too big and conspicuous, it again created problem with the local people. The local people are saying that, you know, why are there are so many Indians in the IT industry? Why are there so many Indians in our financial services industry? Are they not taking away jobs from the local people? And although we try to explain that, no, it's not the case. This is an intra-company transfer, you know? But the people are still not satisfied. And of all the FTAs we have in the world, the only one that created a political problem for Singapore is the FTA with India. But if Bhutan wants to enjoy good trade relations with the world, I would say, please join WTO, and then on a very selective basis, negotiate free trade agreement with your neighbor. Start with your neighbor.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Ambassador, the question is, Singapore is able to attract foreign direct investment, unlike most countries in the subcontinent, including Bhutan. How was Singapore able to achieve that?
We're able to achieve that because we welcome foreign investment. We treat the foreign investor on equal terms with the local investor. We have a very strong rule of law, so the foreign investor know in case of a dispute, they will get a fair hearing in our courts. That we have an independent judiciary, the judges are not prejudiced against the foreigner, And the most important thing is the foreign investor makes a lot of money in Singapore. One study by the US Department of Commerce showed that of all US investment in the world, the investment that earned the highest return is in ASEAN.
Mm-hmm.
That's why ASEAN is very popular destination for foreign investors. The other secret of why Singapore is so attractive to foreign investors is that we have a very good legal regime protecting intellectual property rights. And for the advanced country, intellectual property rights are as important as material goods, So when I was negotiating the free trade agreement with America, the American insists that we must upgrade our legal regime protecting intellectual property right to the same level as the American. And many Singapore bureaucrats are against it, They say, no, we should not make all this concession to the American. We just go by WTO. But my minister at the time, George Yeo, was a visionary, very clever man. He said, no, don't look at this as a concession. Look at this as an opportunity for Singapore to have a legal regime protecting intellectual property right that's among the best in the world. And this will attract very high quality investment in Singapore. So I'm happy to share with you the story that the Americans have more investment in Singapore than they do in China, Japan, India combined. And we welcomed it.
Thank you, Professor. There is this question. In the remarkable story of economic success in terms of productive capacities index with full employment, what were the foremost drivers of success during the initial years?
Industrialization, because the port and trade were not generating enough new jobs. So the government decided we have to industrialize. And when that took off, there were many jobs created in the manufacturing industry. So unlike many other advanced countries, Singapore determined not to allow our manufacturing sector to go down. We feel that it's very important for an economy to have a strong manufacturing sector. And we want to maintain it provide jobs, brings in technology, and so on,
We are very close to the end of the lecture. So perhaps would like to request if the Minister of Economic Affairs would like to ask a question as the last question.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me this opportunity. Firstly, yes, it's very enlightening to hear from Ambassador Tommy Koh. I wish we take this seriously and if we can really work towards economy, because in Bhutan, economy and business stocks are only coming now, I would rather say. And our characteristics is capitalism with socialism or socialism is still there to discuss. But thank you so much. There is so much inspiration. I just wanted to come to one point. Maybe RIGSS, Dasu Chong is here, RCC Chair is here, Prime Minister is here. So Ambassador Tommy Koh, if Bhutan invites you as an expert for national building, help Bhutan within 1 year to build like Singapore, would you accept the offer?
I will come with a team of colleagues because my expertise is very limited, but I will be happy to do anything I can to help Bhutan. Singaporeans love Bhutan. We love Bhutan. We want you to succeed. And whatever we can do to help you, please count on us.
Thank you so much, Chong RIGSS, the Chong RIGSS, and Honorable Prime Minister. The offer is on the plate. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Before I hand over to Dash Song to give the vote of thanks, I would like to also express my thanks to Professor Koh for this very interactive and excellent lecture that we had. And I can see so many things that we can possibly learn from Singapore as we continue to do today. And we see so many similarities of the journey of Singapore that we are currently grappling with here in Bhutan. And the resources and the experiences that you have just shared has been very useful. As I said, there are already many things that I want to sort of note and say, okay, we need to move on this. We could do this. So thank you, Professor, so much for sparing your time to take time out of your very busy schedule to speak to us. And as the Minister has stated, we would definitely like to tap into your vast experience and your tremendous knowledge over this so many years of working as a diplomat, as an academic, and as somebody who has worked at the international stage. So thank you very much, Professor. I hand it over to Dash Song.
Thank you, Tashu. Thank you so much, Honorable Prime Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Honestly, I would have loved for the session to continue for at least another hour, given its relevance to us. And of course, also given the interest amongst our audience, which is apparent from the number of questions coming in. But like all good things, this session too must come to an end. It has been an amazing week of sharing and learning about the secrets behind Singapore's success as a nation. And we have no doubt that our audience feels enriched with the new ideas and insights, some of which we can hopefully put to use either directly in the work that we do or indirectly to guide us along the transformation journey that we have embarked upon. Professor Vincent Yip, who's with us right now, who was here in Bhutan recently, told me that it is only wise for countries to learn from Singapore's example, of course, wherever contextually possible, because Singapore has been the world's largest socio-economic and political laboratory, where many things were tried, tested, and succeeded. As Bhutan undertakes major reforms towards its new vision of becoming a developed nation, Singapore continues to be a rich source of ideas and inspiration to draw from in many aspects of nation building. And it is in that context that RIGSS has organized its 9th RIGSS anniversary lecture series on this very theme of nation building, lessons from Singapore's success. We feel truly happy and grateful that all the lectures could be held as planned. The attendance has been overwhelming, the subjects most relevant, and more importantly, the speakers most resourceful and distinguished. Your Excellency, Ambassador Koh, we are immensely thankful to you for your wonderful talk and the Q&A session with the audience today, and for sparing so much time and effort to get us the best speakers for this lecture series.
Thank you.
And thank you indeed for proposing to deviate from our usual format of the lecture by devoting more time to Q&A. I think it has been very helpful for us to ask many questions of relevance to us.
Yeah.
We will indeed always remain grateful for your gesture of goodwill and support for our institute's work, and more importantly, for our country's success. Thank you so much, Excellency.
Yeah. Thank
I would
you.
also like to thank the Honorable Chairperson of the Royal Civil Service Commission and the Vice Chair of the RIGSS Governing Board, Amkar Mahamudoji, for sparing your valuable time this morning and for so ably moderating the session to make it most interactive and purposeful. Last but not the least, I would like to extend our deepest appreciation and gratitude to the Honorable Prime Minister and all other dignitaries and participants for your overwhelming support and active participation throughout the lecture series. This has been most encouraging and motivating, and we shall reciprocate by bringing you more of such useful activities in the days and weeks ahead. Thank you so much, Tashidele, and have a great day ahead. Thank you so much, Excellency.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last, thank you lah. Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.